What's up, everybody? Welcome to another Truth Seeking Thursday here with Jay Young, and my name is Greg Dowd, and we are going to be covering the topic tonight of the mouse Utopia experiments. And if you're not familiar with this is an interesting experiment that was done by this guy John B. Calhoun back in the day, and we're going to be diving into it tonight in the live stream. So it's pretty interesting little experiment, and what are its implications on humanity? So what's up, Jay? How's it going, man? How have you been?
Life's good. Past couple weeks since we were last streaming, my dad and I got my 30-foot antenna mast up and running. So I've got one VHF UHF antenna up. I've got two high frequency antennas partially mounted, and that's been great. I've got probably 2 or 3 times the amount of signals because they're elevated. They're higher quality, so that they're nice and clean. And I am slowly switching over from Windows to Linux. So I've got this laptop switched over because Windows is so bad. It's has so much bloatware and spyware in there. And my desktop right now is Windows 10. So it's not great, but it's not the worst thing.
Oh, you stopped it from downloading Windows 11?
Oh, absolutely. And this laptop came with Windows 11, so I was so happy to get off of Linux. So if anyone wants to know about Linux, hit me up. I'm a total beginner. I'm a novice. I'm learning about this stuff, but it is, as operating systems go, it's pretty lightweight. It's all voluntary. You know, it's non-commercial software, and so they don't put any bloatware, any spyware. You have high levels of control in there. Nothing can be installed without your password permission. So that's a huge plus right there. And so right now I'm just trying to find the Windows analog for the different programs that are in there, like my password management system and playing audio and video, all that good stuff. And you can even run VM virtual machine in a Linux environment, so you can have Windows running inside of that if you absolutely need some certain Windows programs. So, you know, looks like it's a good fit. And then
like Ubuntu or something.
Yeah, so I'm using a Linux Mint distribution, which is basically, I guess, an alternative, or it's a split off of Ubuntu. So it's nice. I've been really happy about that, or maybe Debian, I can't remember. But it's been nice. Been very, very satisfied with it. And here's the one thing that I think everyone can relate to. When I'm running that laptop on Windows 11, the fan is running almost constantly. When I run it on Linux, the fan almost never runs. The only time it runs is if I'm installing a program, and that's it. So just that alone, I think, tells you everything you need to know of how lightweight it is relative to Windows. So very happy with it so far.
Oh yeah, Windows is running all kinds of crazy stuff in the background, and in fact, I've got all kinds of stuff running in the background right now. So
yeah,
got some stuff down.
Yeah.
So we don't crash. But yeah, it there is a huge difference with that, and I have one that's a separate laptop that I use that's primarily Linux, and then the one we're streaming on right now is Windows, and I've been cautioned many a times by other podcasters that you could have a big interview lined up and Windows decides it wants to do an update and you're screwed.
Yep. Yeah, with Linux, it only updates when you explicitly give it permission to do so. Otherwise, you could go years and never have an update if you don't want it.
Yep.
So I'm on my personal, as you can tell, I'm on a personal quest to try to get as many people off of Windows and onto Linux. And I'm trying to do the research so I can help people bridge that gap to make that transition as smooth as possible. You know, so it's necessary. We've got to show these companies that you know, that inertia and laziness don't mean anything to us.
Mm-hmm.
So. Finally, my parents and I got a cow, and it was delivered to the processor Tuesday of last week, and it should yield about 1,000 pounds of final product between meat, bones, and fat. and organs. So looking forward to that. And it's literally in my town.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. For anyone else in Huntsville, they are opening up. This is Flint River Farms. I'm not a partner to them or anything like that. I'm a customer. Flint River Farms is opening up a commercial grade processing plant, literally right across the street from their ranch, and so it should serve as a nice place for the Huntsville area for processing. So if you need a place, Flint River Farms is a great place. People are just really nice there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Flint River Farms.
Yeah, I think they have at any one time about 700 head. So it's a nice place.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's pretty good, pretty decent.
Oh wow, they're seriously running a bunch of cows.
Yeah. I could be wrong. It's maybe between 550 and 7, but somewhere around there.
Wow.
Yep.
Crazy.
Yep.
Well, cool, man.
What about you?
Sounds like you got a lot of stuff going on.
Trying.
Getting some stuff done. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. We had a solar workshop event over the weekend and had some folks out to my property to learn more about solar power. And it was the first workshop I put on, so definitely learned a lot about being able to plan ahead of time and make sure you market way ahead of time. Also, probably would be helpful to have some content. I have some content about solar, but to put more content out there specifically on different systems and some things that I've done, so that people are more aware of the capabilities and just do more promotion of the event and better planning next time.
Yep.
So that there's some months ahead of time that people can plan and prepare to be at the event. So learned a lot. Got the first one under my belt so that I can refine it and do better next time. So yeah, it's one of those things with like a lot of things that I do. It's like, for the longest time, it was a lot of analysis paralysis, but then it was, you have to make a decision to do something.
Yeah.
Right? At a certain point, you have to do something, right? And so, by doing it, then you're going to learn through that process. And so this was another one of those things where I had to do it and move forward and learn and grow. So
good for you, man. That's awesome.
So yeah, got that under my belt, and still putting some videos and some bill of materials sheets together coming out of that, and getting back to busy work schedule and helping some friends on their properties. So that's what's going to be coming up for the winter time here, and that's where we're at. So yeah, Jay, you want to get into the topic tonight?
Yeah, it's a good topic. I'm really glad you brought it up.
The mouse utopia, man. So designing an experiment where you give all these mice everything they need, so-called everything they need, in order to see what plays out in the little mouse social interactions and environment that they're going to be living in. So, yeah, this guy, John B. Calhoun, was the experimenter that ran these experiments and studied these mice in their environment. And I believe that there were a lot of like different types of setups of these, so-called mouse utopias, and he saw some interesting things that the mice would do in these situations where they had everything they needed as far as like being able to survive. But I guess there was a constraint that they were confined to a certain area.
Yeah.
And I think the whole idea stems from the idea of overpopulation and then being condensed into the cities. And so I guess the idea is to study what happens when you condense populations and look at the outcomes from these condensed populations. So,
and I think to add to that is both high levels of density, but also what would be considered a post-scarcity society, where the mice they didn't have to do anything in order to eat and survive. It was ideal temperatures, unlimited amount of food and water available to them, no predators, no diseases, and so everything needed to survive. They didn't have to work for anything. And what were the emergent phenomenon of that? It was fascinating.
Yeah. And I have a resource that kind of dives into a little bit of the history of the whole thing and a little bit of the background that I'll play an excerpt from, and then we can kind of dive into it a little further. But this one comes from the channel Friedrich Knudsen, Down the Rabbit Hole, the Mouse Utopia Experiments. So let me play this for a minute, and then we'll get into it.
Of the strange research to come out of mid-1900s America, there is little with a legacy as enduring or as terrifying as the Mouse Utopia experiments. Taking place throughout the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, the grim fate of the subjects was published in the national magazine Scientific American, and the experiments themselves were largely taken as apocalyptic portents. In a post-war United States, the language used to describe the results, such as behavior sync, became synonymous with fears of an overpopulated world and violent, deviant behavior in cities. Today, they are preserved within fiction, such as Channel 4's conspiracy thriller Utopia and the classic animated movie The Secret of NIMH.
Our world began changing.
So what were the Mouse Utopia experiments? Shortly after World War II, a group known collectively as the Environmentalists were making a large push to prevent environmental degradation, as well as overexploitation of the planet's renewable resources. Among these people were a group specifically known as the Neo-Malthusians, a term referring to the 18th and 19th century English scholar Thomas Robert Malthus. Malthus proposed that while the world's population may increase exponentially, food production can only increase linearly, leading to an eventual subsistence-level existence for the human race that became known as a Malthusian catastrophe. While advancements such as the Green Revolution saw that this didn't come about, the Neo-Malthusians acknowledged his concerns about overpopulation and feared that this pattern would result in the collapse of civilization or, at best, have extreme adverse effects. These fears were given a platform in writing of the time, especially in works such as William Folk's Road to Survival in 1948, and perhaps most famously, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson in 1962. Before the movement's explosion of popularity in the 50s and 60s, however, researchers had already begun work investigating the effects of population growth, and among them was a man named John B. Calhoun. Born in 1917, Calhoun took an early interest in science, specifically ornithology, publishing his first paper on birds when he was 15, but over time, his interest would change. By the time he received his PhD, his focus had turned to ethology, the study of animal behavior. When his education was concluded, he moved with his family to Towson, Maryland, to begin research at Johns Hopkins University in nearby Baltimore, but the research itself would be conducted much closer to home. In 1947, shortly after he arrived, he approached his neighbor about using some of their neglected property for an experiment. The scope would be massive, and according to Calhoun, his neighbor probably didn't expect such a scale when they agreed to let him use the forested area. Taking over a quarter of an acre, Calhoun constructed a massive habitat, complete with food, water, ample shelter, and protection from predators, with the only limiting condition being their restriction to the quarter-acre living space. He affectionately provided his enclosure a name, Rat City. Unfortunately, no publicly available images of Rat City exist. Calhoun was very familiar with Norway rats, having performed research on them for his doctorate, and he estimated that Rat City could sustain approximately 5,000 individuals, though if they reached this number, the population density would be tight. He began by placing 5 pregnant females in the enclosure, providing ample genetic diversity, and soon the population was increasing exponentially. But then something surprising happened. Rather than the population increasing to fill the space of the enclosure, it quickly leveled off at 150 members. He also noted some behavioral peculiarities. Despite the large size of Rat City, the residents seemed to gather around just a few places, forming social groups of 12 and limiting themselves to specific feeding locations. He would conclude the experiment after 2 years and 4 months, during which the population never grew over 200. Careful observation revealed the cause: high infant mortality. For some reason, as the experiment progressed and the population increased, the mothers were not caring for their young properly, leading to most of them dying before reaching maturity. Calhoun had his theories as to why this was, but to prove them, he would need more data. In 1954, about 5 years after his initial experiment concluded, he was hired by the National Institute of Mental Health, often shortened to NIM. Within the laboratory of psychology, Calhoun was given ample resources to continue his work. With a team, he began feverishly designing and constructing habitats, sometimes referred to as universes, where he performed numerous smaller-scale and more controlled versions of his original rat study on a domesticated strain of albino Norway rat. These rats would want for nothing. All physical needs for a healthy rat lifestyle would be provided for them, including food, water, climate control, and nesting material. Calhoun spent 8 years perfecting his enclosures and methods until finally, in February of 1962, an article of his writing was published in the magazine Scientific American. The article was entitled Population Density and Social Pathology. His opening paragraph ominously reads so, quote, "In the celebrated thesis of Thomas Malthus, vice and misery impose the ultimate natural limit on the growth of populations. Students of the subject have given most of their attention to misery, that is, to predation, disease, and food supply as forces that operate to adjust the size of a population to its environment. But what of vice? Setting aside the moral burden of this word, what are the effects of the social behavior of a species on population growth, and of population density on social behavior?" Unquote. To answer this question, he cited 6 of his experiments in particular, all with similar composition and concerningly similar results. The design of these habitats was simple. The layout was a rectangle measuring 10 feet by 14 feet, divided into 4 equal sections by electric fences. 3 of these fences sported bridges over which the rats could climb, while one fence lacked such a bridge, essentially creating one long space that wrapped in on itself. Each section was equipped similarly, with a food hopper, water, and nesting areas accessible by spiral staircases. But Calhoun, leveraging his experience with the rats, made special changes to encourage specific behaviors. He enticed the rats to use one of the center pens by making the spiral staircase to that pen's living spaces shorter than the others, though he admits this was a comparatively small factor. But the more insidious change was to their food supply. In half of the experiments, Calhoun supplied powdered food, but in the other half, he placed feeders of his own design, consisting of hard pellets behind a wire mesh. Half of his experiments began with 32 mice, the other half with 56, of evenly male and female composition, and all having just reached maturity. Calhoun estimated that approximately 40 rats could comfortably be housed in these enclosures, but he would allow these populations to increase to 80 before he would cull them. Almost immediately after introduction, things began to go awry. The females, unsurprisingly, spread themselves out somewhat evenly through the pens, but after the males jockeyed for dominance and those of highest rank were determined, they began to distribute themselves strangely. Less dominant male rats will typically awaken earlier and begin to wander and forage for food, and due to the design of the pen, this meant that they usually would end up in the center sections to eat. During this time, the dominant males of the outer pens would wake up and begin guarding their respective territories. Since there was only one entrance ramp to either end, the dominant males of either pen would bar the return of the less dominant males, forcing the male population to clump in the center pens, while the dominant end males protected what came to be their harems. Only a few other deferential males were allowed to remain. These few remaining males began exhibiting odd behavior. Though they would spend most of their time in the burrows with the females, hiding away from the dominant male, they would never attempt to mate with any of them. Instead, perplexingly, they would try to mate with the dominant male, and even more perplexing, the dominant male would not fight these attempts. At the same time as this was happening, the effect of Calhoun's special feeders was taking hold. Since procuring food was such a lengthy process at the hard food feeders, it was common for one rat to join another while in the process of feeding. By this method, the rats slowly became conditioned to eating in the company of other rats until, eventually, the rats would refuse to eat unless another rat was present. Since more rats tended to be in the center pens, this behavior meant that, over time, more and more rats made their way there, further condensing them. This heightened the proximity of an already cramped population. In the experiments with the powdered food, this effect was far less pronounced. With these factors combined, Calhoun noted what he called a behavioral sink, or an increase in pathological activity in the rats due to the stress involved in such high population density. For the females, the behavioral sink manifested in reduced capacity for nest building and young rearing. Infant rats are extremely dependent upon their mothers for nearly all things. However, under the effects of the behavioral sink, the mothers would often be interrupted in their nest building practices to engage in some other social activity. As time wore on, this led to sparser nests which could not house the young properly. If a mother decided to move her litter, she often would only move some of them or scatter them about the pen in separate locations. What's more, when female rats are ready to mate, the males can sense it, and the enclosed space meant that a female could not escape the continuous advances of the males during these periods. Even when they would enter their nests for a reprieve, they would be followed in and harrowed. These factors together resulted in an extremely high infant mortality rate, in one case reaching 96%. For the males, this manifested in different ways. The dominant males would occasionally lash out in violence against the other members of the pen, including infants, often biting and wounding their tails. Among the lower class males were three groups. The first he described as the homosexuals, which he immediately corrects as pansexuals, who would not compete for status but would often attempt to mate with any other rat, regardless of gender or age. Much like in the end pens, these advances went unchallenged. The second group he described as somnambulists, who moved slowly through the pen without interacting with other individuals in any fashion, and the other rats, in turn, ignored them, except in rare circumstances. These rats, externally, he described as fat, sleek, and healthy-looking. But to him, the strangest group was the third, which he named the probers. These rats were hyperactive, hypersexual, and pansexual. Despite violence from the dominant males, they would viciously pursue females in heat, eschewing any sort of courtship ritual and following them into their burrows to mate. Later on in the experiments, they would often find the corpses of the improperly cared for young, which they would cannibalize. In time, one of Calhoun's assistants would publicly describe these pens as hell. At this point, Calhoun ended the experiments, but he predicted that these pathological changes would have eventually led to the deaths of the colonies. At their conclusion, he would take the 4 healthiest males and females and allow them to breed, but their behavior had been so inexorably altered that none of their pups survived beyond weaning. This short article enraptured its US audience, and the effects on both the scientific world and popular culture were immediate. People began to relate Calhoun's rat experiments to modern city life, and in an era where fear of social deviance was reaching an extreme high, it was largely seen as a reflection of the current time and where society could be heading, egged on by Calhoun's provocative language and allegorical design of his test environment, made to look like a city. Population density quickly became a common topic. Psychologist Carl Rogers, in his work Some Social Issues Which Concern Me, stated that, quote, "The resemblance to human behavior is frightening. In humans, we see poor family relationships, the lack of caring, the complete alienation, the magnetic attraction of overcrowding, the lack of involvement which is so great that it permits people to watch a long, drawn-out murder without so much as calling the police. Perhaps all city dwellers are inhabitants of a behavioral sink." Unquote. Soon after, studies of dense urban environments were conducted to see if these effects translated directly to humans, but what they found was inconclusive and unsatisfying. Despite the suggestions of Calhoun's rats, humans in cities reacted differently or sometimes opposite the manner that researchers expected, depending on the location. No matter how they tried, no evidence of a widespread behavioral sink could be found in urban areas. But this did not dissuade Calhoun. Even as others explored the problem of overcrowding, Calhoun frantically continued his research. Now a celebrated success and emboldened by the public acceptance of his ideas, he resumed his work at NIM on an even larger scale, though again away from the public eye. He spent his time on new subjects as he continued to perfect his enclosures and experiments until finally, after 11 years, Calhoun revealed his magnum opus through an article he entitled Death Death Squared, which was published in the journal Proceedings of the Royal Society of Medicine in January of 1973. The lengthy opening to this article was undeniably apocalyptic. Calhoun wrote, "I shall largely speak of mice, but my thoughts are on man, on healing, on life and its evolution. Threatening life and evolution are the two deaths, death of the spirit and death of the body. Evolution, in terms of ancient wisdom, is the acquisition of access to the tree of life." Unquote. He goes on to heavily reference Revelations and of the riders of the apocalypse, using them to proclaim that the Hippocratic Oath applies not only to the body, but to the spirit. After this dramatic introduction, he described his test. For the most part, these new experiments were similar to his 1963 trials, including unlimited access to food and water, protection from the elements and predators, and safeguards against disease. Many parts, however, were drastically altered. As Calhoun mentions in his introduction, the Norway rats used in his first publicized experiments were replaced with albino house mice, which were taken from a breeding group from the National Institutes of Health made specifically to prevent communicable disease. To fit his new subjects, Calhoun had designed an entirely new enclosure. This version was much more vertical, with 16 wall-mounted housing areas for the rats at the tops of long metal tubes, which Calhoun called walk-up apartments. At the bottom of each apartment was a virtually unlimited supply of food, water, and nesting material. With the space provided, Calhoun estimated that it could potentially hold 3,840 mice. He named this enclosure Universe 25. Calhoun's methods also had changed. Rather than instituting population controls, he would interfere far less. His plan was to place 8 mice in the enclosure, 4 male and 4 female, and simply watch and wait. Calhoun observed 4 distinct phases in the ensuing experiment. Phase A was predictable, constituting the time period before the first new mice were born, which ended up being 104 days. For the mice, these days were, quote, marked by considerable social turmoil. After the social order was established and the first brood was born, the population began Phase B, which Calhoun named the exploitation phase. During this time, the mice doubled in number every 55 days as new young grew to maturity and had their own young. This doubling continued until day 315, after which the doubling rate slowed to a rate of 145 days, nearly 3 times as long. By this point, the different broods had clumped into one side of the pen, exhibiting the same sort of clumping as the Norway rats, but this time without any coaxing from Calhoun's designs. This change in the rate of procreation marked Phase C, which Calhoun labeled as the stagnation phase. This is when the most notable events occurred, and they eerily mirrored Calhoun's rat experiments. In a natural setting, those mice which find no social niche will leave the colony, but in this experiment, emigration was impossible, and so those forced to remain withdrew from society. These dejected males formed a large pool in the center of the enclosure. They quickly became characterized by both their inactivity and their many scars and wounds. Occasionally, they would grow agitated and attack one another, and with nowhere to retreat, the recipient of these attacks would simply lay still and endure the assault. The outcast females, rather than joining them, would retreat to the highest apartments and live quietly among one another. It was during this time that the behavioral sink manifested, with mice gathering around specific food hoppers in large numbers, while others remained almost entirely untouched, showing how, again, the need for social interaction had become so intertwined with the need for food that the former had overtaken the latter. The males who had won the initial fights also were placed under extreme stress. As more and more mice reached maturity from within and without, the leaders of the social groups continually had to patrol and defend their territory. Eventually, they reached the point of exhaustion and could not defend the females within their group. These females were therefore forced to defend the nest themselves, even when nursing their young, leading to generalized aggressive behavior. This aggression would inevitably be misdirected onto their young, who would be wounded by their mothers and forced to leave the nest before they were finished weaning. Much like the rats, the mother mice would also forget some of their young when moving from one nesting site to another. Due to the added stress of defending their territory, sometimes the mothers would reabsorb unborn mice in the womb, further reducing the fertility rates. Calhoun writes, "For all practical purposes, there had been a death of societal organization by the end of Phase C. Finally, there was Phase D, which Calhoun entitled the death phase. This phase was characterized largely by an entire generation of young who had been rejected by their mothers early and forced to leave the nest, and they were therefore unable to exhibit normal social behavior. This manifested in numerous ways. The females of this generation had far fewer children, and those that did have children lacked the maternal instincts necessary to raise them beyond weaning." Calhoun goes on to describe the males of this generation. Quote, "Male counterparts to these non-reproducing females were soon dubbed the beautiful ones. They never engaged in sexual approaches toward females, and they never engaged in fighting, and so they had no wound or scar tissue. Thus, their pelage remained in excellent condition. Their behavioral repertoire became largely confined to eating, drinking, sleeping, and grooming, none of which carried any social implications beyond that represented by contiguity of bodies." Unquote. As the last mice with reproductive instincts aged beyond their fertility, Calhoun declared that the last male would die around day 1780 of the experiment, effectively rendering the colony dead as it would be unable to produce any more young. His present tense language implied that, when the article was published, the colony was still technically alive, though its final fate was practically sealed. Calhoun closed his article with a call to action. "For an animal so complex as man, there is no logical reason why a comparable sequence of events should not also lead to species extinction. If opportunities for role fulfillment fall far short of the demand by those capable of filling roles and having expectancies to do so, only violence and disruption of social organization can follow. Individuals born under these circumstances will be so out of touch with reality as to be incapable even of alienation. Their most complex behaviors will become fragmented. Acquisition, creation, and utilization of ideas appropriate for life in a post-industrial cultural conceptual technological society will have been blocked. Just as biological generativity in the mouse involves this species' most complex behaviors, so does ideational generativity for man. Loss of these respective complex behaviors means death of the species." But even as Calhoun was performing his research on mice, others had been at work applying his theories to humans. By this point, researchers had moved to more specific locations of overcrowding rather than the generalized location of cities, testing the effects on students in dormitories and patients at hospitals. But the most fruitful example they discovered was in prisons. Paul Paulus from the University of Texas wrote that prisons were the perfect place for this sort of study, describing the social interaction between inmates as intense, prolonged, inescapable, and realistic. The prison in the study also offered the closest analog to Calhoun's rat experiments, since the prisoners could not escape the company of others, even in their communal cells. There, they found connections between over-socialization and suicide, violence, psychopathy, and stress. After such studies, environmental psychologists began to discover the problem. They identified two different kinds of density: physical density and social density. Physical density was the amount of space per person, while social density was the number of individuals occupying a space. They found that social density was the much more important factor, as individuals in high social density were unable to control their interactions with others. Based on this research, human environments could be designed to at least partially mitigate these issues, allowing those living within them the privacy they needed to maintain healthy social interaction. Outside of scientific discourse, Calhoun's rhetoric has maintained its strength through the years, with different groups of all political persuasions bending his results to support their views on social degradation, however they may define it. Among more scholarly sources, Calhoun has been both lauded and criticized for his work. Those who support him cite his forward thinking about overpopulation, while those who deride him cite his misrepresentation of the actual social problems within cities, guiding discourse away from the true causes of societal discord. But no matter what those in the modern day think of his research, his influence on the way America views its cities is undeniable.
All right. So, a lot to unpack. I mean, there's this whole setup of the, supposed utopia, right? Like, is this the total vision of one person's concept of a utopia? I mean, the mice had everything they needed to survive, but they're not really able to like leave the confines of this universe, right?
Yeah, I think that's an important characteristic to call out, is that forced merger between individuals. And I don't know if mice have the diversity of personalities that Homo sapiens do, but I'm sure there are differences, and we saw that in the video where we had different behavioral types that emerged out of that. Now, whether those were a matter of genetics or the way they were raised, I don't know. I'm not going to make a call on that, but in subsequent studies, they've identified basically about 5 different behavioral types out of that, and some of those are identified already. They were the pansexuals, right? The beautiful ones, etc. And I think that those are all emergent phenomenon. When we take individuals and we forcefully merge them into an environment where we're still driven by our genetics, we're still driven by evolutionary psychology, right? None of us can get away from that. That's just a fact. And even when we strip away the need for fighting for or struggling for resources, there's still the aspect of struggle, of what does this other person who's right in front of my face, what do they represent? Are they a threat to me? And I think we saw some of that with some of those dominant mice, those very aggressive mice, right? Is they, whether it was naturally or culturally, they took on a very aggressive and assertive role, not just against other mice on an individual basis, but even within their quote unquote tribe. They kind of took control. I'm not going to pretend to know what percentage that was. I'm sure it was not the majority. But I do appreciate the analog that they brought up in regards to prisons. That honestly, that sounds like a personal hell to me. It really does. You're taking a group of people who probably have very high instances of psychopathy and or sociopathy, and forcefully merge them together in an institution which has very little in the way of comfort. And they're not wanting for water, they're not wanting for food unless someone takes it from them, right? And what do we hear happens all the time? Crime is rampant in there. Assault, aggressive battery is very common. Murder is very common in there. Drug use is very common. And you know, I'm going to just use the 2 letters SA, right? Certain type of assault is very common in prisons. And honestly, that sounds like hell. And, you know, and that SA that happens, that's not done to promote the population. That's not there to promote the culture or the human species, but it happens anyway. And, you know, I do wish, on a quick side note, I wish that we would reconsider the way we do prisons in this country. You know, it looks like just a perfect breeding ground for criminal college, you know, and SA, you know, just very aggressive acts against each other, and promoting psychopathy or sociopathy, I should say, you know, in mass scale. And I don't mean to over anthropomorphize the Mouse Utopia experiment, but it seems like there's a ton of analogs between, especially Universe 25 and our modern urban environments.
Yeah, and it kind of, to me, the thought that it gave me was that this is somebody's vision of like a future environment, right? Like John Calhoun, maybe he was setting this up towards like, this is maybe how humans will live in these high rises, mainly in cities. Let
So just a heads up, your audio has gone down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Better.
Yeah. You may have to say that again. You were talking about John B. Calhoun. And what was that again?
Yeah, it seems like it's like John B. Calhoun's idea of some future city environment, right? Like the way he set up this experiment, and the mice that they were using from the National Institute of Health, where they weren't going to share diseases or whatever, is like certain genetics of the mice.
Yeah,
is interesting in that, what he used for the experiment. And so it very much is like kind of this idea of like a centrally planned society, really. And looking into how John B. Calhoun initially got his funding from the Rockefellers, and the Rockefeller Foundation. And later on, it moved into the National Institute of Health. And it was really interesting that that little movie, The Secrets of NIMH, kind of comes from this whole.
I didn't know that. That was fascinating.
Concept of the Mouse Utopia experiments and stuff. Yeah. And you put in a really interesting article here that goes into this whole idea of that. I guess John Calhoun's kind of conclusion there was at a certain point you reach this behavioral sink.
Yeah.
And I'd like to pull this article up there where it gets into this whole concept of the behavioral sink. And I thought this was this pretty interesting little section here. Let's see that pulled up there.
Is that Cabinet Magazine?
Yeah, this one is coming from Cabinet Magazine. Mm-hmm. And so it goes in to talk about the lesson found a ready audience, talking about this whole experiment with the way he set up the Universe 25. And it talks about the design of his experiments and the language he used to describe them. Universe 25 resembles the utopian modernist urban fantasies of architects such as Ludwig Hilbensheimer. Calhoun referred to the dwelling places within these universes as tower blocks and walk-up apartments, as well as the preening beautiful ones he refers to as juvenile delinquents and dropouts. This handy use of anthropomorphism is usual in a scientist. We are being invited to draw parallels with human society. And that lesson found a ready audience. Population density and social pathology was for an academic paper a smash hit, being cited up to 150 times per year a year. Particularly effective was Calhoun's name for the point past which the slide into breakdown becomes irretrievable, the behavioral sink. The unhealthy connotations of the term are not accidental. Calhoun noted Drilly, the sink, a parapathology of shared hopelessness, drew in pathological behavior and exacerbated its effects. Once the event horizon of the behavioral sink was passed, the end was certain. So, yeah, it's almost like this black hole, kind of referring to this like black hole of this like fall into hopelessness.
You know, to go with the analogy there in terms of black hole, I like that analogy. You know, and for people who know about black holes, there's something called the event horizon, and some people think it's merely a distance. Other people think it's an actual structure, and you know, anything that falls in past the event horizon cannot come back out. It is irretrievable at that point. And there was something else you had mentioned here, which I think is, so we talked about learned helplessness 2 episodes ago. And I think this kind of gets into that. So there's learned helplessness at the individual level, and I think there's learned helplessness at the societal and cultural level. And it sounds like that's kind of what happens here. If I remember correctly, rats who were removed from these experiments and placed into normal populations, they were not able to break out of their prior experience, and they continued, you know, to exhibit the same behavioral sink behaviors and attitudes. And I think that is probably the people or rats who are able to break out of that, probably few and far between. They're the exception, not the rule. And that's kind of sad, because I think this ends up becoming a broader issue for any country, any nation state, or even a region within a nation state. Is it's almost impossible for them to break out of that. And I think we're starting to see that in most Western cultures, most Western countries.
It's very interesting. I know. So I was listening to another podcast today where they were talking about Japan, for instance, and Japan has these whole part of their population who have just like kind of dropped out of society, and they're just like in their houses all the time, like isolated from everyone. Where they've just like been like, all right, I'm just out, man.
Yeah, part of that population, and I don't know if it's a subset or it's an overlap, but in Japanese, I think it's called hikikomori, which basically means the grass eaters, right? And these are specifically men who just don't engage in any sexual activity at all, and because they're not even pursuing women. So even if they have engaged in sexual activity or they have not, all roads lead to Rome in that point, and they're pulling back. Whether it be, like you said, and what you said I think is accurate, there are sections of the population which completely withdraw from cultural and societal interaction, or these are quote unquote just hikikomori, and they may interact with people, but they have zero interest or motivation to engage in any sexual activity, much or even just dating in general.
Yeah, and so I mean, you, I guess there is always that ability as human beings that you can overcome all these challenges, but it's like I guess Japan is a little bit of, it's a little bit kind of isolated. They don't have a ton of like new people kind of coming in there, and I guess they're kind of frowned upon in their society of a ton of foreigners being in their country. I
lived there for a year, and they were always very cordial, very polite to me, but I always knew I was an outsider. It didn't matter. And what ended up happening was I had to kind of link up with other Westerners. So I had friends from Romania, Europe, especially UK and Scotland, Ireland, Canada, United States. Had friends from Brazil, and we kind of had to form our own little, enclaves, if you will. And we were great with each other, just not a problem. But yeah, it was always kind of beneath the surface that we were outsiders in their country, but they were never abusive. They were never nasty with us. Very polite, very very cordial, and welcome in their own way. But it was pretty obvious that we were never going to be Japanese.
Yeah. So I mean, we are kind of seeing like in certain societies, I guess, like some of these things in as a lot of these things for people's common necessities and comforts become more of a norm, and there's this excess in abundance, that it does seem that in industrial societies that the population growth, it slows or declines.
Yeah.
In a lot of industrialized societies where people have, as far as like being able to survive, plenty of food and water and resources in that regard, but then I guess there's not as much of a need, as in the past. You would have large families, and it was really like about attempting to survive, because you didn't know if some of those children were going to die. Those children could contribute to the family, to helping out with the different tasks and being able to have the things necessary for survival. And yeah, while I don't think that I think the big difference here in like these mouse utopia experiments, for one, it's like, is it really a utopia, or is it a prison? And does utopia exist? I think that the word utopia translates to nowhere, because it doesn't exist.
There was a great Twilight Zone episode on this, and there was a guy who was a bit of a degenerate, small time criminal, and he was always just looking for just the next great time. And he I think in the episode he passes on, and he wakes up, and he's basically in a casino, and he ends up finding out he wins every bet. He's making tons of money, and he's always successful with the ladies. And he thought, wow, this is great. I'm in heaven, and everything's on easy street for me. And after a while, he gets sick of it. He gets sick of winning all the time, no matter how much or how little effort he puts into it. Same thing with being successful with the ladies. Anything he does, smart or stupid, he's successful with the ladies. And he, this came out like 60 years ago, so I hope I don't spoil it for anyone here. But he has a guide who's taking him through, and he thinks he's in heaven. And after a while, he says, I don't know if I'm in heaven or I'm in the other place. And his guide said, how do you know you're not in the other place? And then he realizes he was in his own personal hell, that all the stuff he had wanted and strived for in his criminal life, fast money, fast women, when he finally got it, it was not what he wanted, and that just ruined him. And I thought that was kind of interesting, that he was living in a post-scarcity society, if you will, and bent all to his benefit, and he found that to be a hell.
Yeah, I think there's something inherent in the struggle for finding meaning. And I talked about this recently with one of my coworkers, that I think like in the 90s, like things were pretty good, but like you listen to a lot of the songs and stuff that came out of that era, it was like all about like being sad and like angst, just all this angst. And it was like we were inventing problems because things were so good. It was like, we need some kind of struggle so that we can feel like we have some kind of meaning. I think like you just listen to a lot of the songs back in that time, and it was just like everything's such a downer, man.
Yeah. Almost the entirety of the grunge movement was out of that, right? So you had Soundgarden, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, all these, and just look at the lyrics and the style of the music. And then you could take other groups like Tool, great bands, and very, very innovative in terms of music. But boy, talk about some wrist slicer stuff. That was not good.
Yeah.
I think you characterized it well, where you said they had to manufacture problems, and I think that's what a lot of people do. Is, and if I could go on a quick tangent here, that I think that in a post-scarcity society, which is kind of what we have here in the United States, we're seeing the rise of sections of our community. I'm not going to call out specific names, but sections of our culture which have to manufacture problems. They have to manufacture difficulties because they are not a part of the World War II greatest generation, right? They weren't born in the Depression, then fought World War II, and then other generations before or after that, where they had great adversity and great accomplishments coming out of that, and consequently great respect by subsequent generations. And some of these members of our culture today, especially in the West, they don't feel that sense of accomplishment. They don't feel that sense of facing adversity and being tested. And I think that Tyler Durden does a really good job of kind of summarizing that in Fight Club, where it was in the basement and he gives this Great Depression speech. It was a great monologue. And, he says, our lives are our Great Depression. We didn't have a Great Depression. We didn't have a World War II to fight. And as a consequence, members of much of the culture have to manufacture out of whole cloth problems that have to create challenges that don't exist, and it gives them special status, and that's kind of what they're looking for. And the thing about it is, all that special status, those challenges, and those overcoming those challenges, it's all empty, it's all vapid. At some level, they know this, and they can never reconcile the fact that their accomplishments are empty. And I think it actually creates self-loathing in a certain way, and so it creates like a vampire coven where they end up eating their own, because they have to take that emotional energy and have got to focus it somewhere. And there's a certain party in our country that's creating that, right? They're just eating their own, and their acceptable behaviors and populations are getting smaller and smaller because they have no choice but to eat their own.
And it brings up this idea that it's always I guess this is an old adage of that, weak men create hard times, and then strong men create good times, and then the whole thing repeats itself.
Yep. Yep. Ayn Rand talked about this quite a bit in her work around objectivism, and that what gives us meaning so much is our work, and the thing that we have to apply to our work is reason. That is really the only advantage that we have over all the other life forms out there is reason. And it is, and I give her a lot of credit, because I had not thought of this until I was reading about objectivism, that in many ways, yes, the work is necessary for survival, yes. But then in terms of giving us meaning and our ability to shape our lives, the environment around us, as Steve Jobs talked about, a reality distortion field, right? The ability to impact our environment, hopefully in a good and positive way. And I give her a lot of credit for identifying that, and she worked really hard to get where she got to in life. And just so much of the pillars of objectivism really revolved around the concept of applying reason and hard work. And I give some religious groups in our country a lot of credit, like the Puritans and the Quakers, very hard people, and they find deep meaning in the work that they do, and they really try to stay on the straight and narrow, and I think they're a group to be really lauded.
Yeah, I think there is a lot to be said by in our modern society, right? Like there's all these other factors at play too. Like we're so in front of screens so much,
Yeah.
which is not a natural environment for human beings. Like human beings have adapted over time to being outside mostly and being in this like kind of subsistence level of existence for so long up until recent times where things have become a lot more comfortable
Yeah.
for humans on a day-to-day basis, that that inherent struggle to survive it, or like you said, create some kind of meaning and have meaningful work. Like most people are going into a job where they're punching new, maybe they're creating a document or editing a document, or maybe creating a design, or like uh or just meaningless paperwork.
Sure.
Just doing paperwork. And a lot of times when you're doing that, like it very much seems like what am I really doing? Like am I really making a difference at all in the world, or am I just like another cog in this little machine, just filling in the blanks for this faceless business that I'm working for? And I think a lot of people are when they're caught in that position, you are faced with this like existential crisis where you're like, what is the meaning of anything? It just gets to a point where it's just kind of soul draining from you. And there's this yearning to get back to something that is tangible, which is why I think there is this huge resurgence in people wanting to do the homesteading and getting back to the land and doing something with their hands and providing more for themselves, because we're severely lacking that in our world that we're living in today. And then on at the other end of that is like, that's the antidote for this whole modern society, is like, get in the sun, have some community, do some stuff that's hard, physically hard. And um and in my own life, really like finding that kind of stuff like really gave me more of a direction and something to strive for, like little by little, working on self-reliance. You don't get there overnight, and it takes it's a long journey, but that's something like a high goal to reach for. Almost feel like it's like I want to create my own little like uh my own ecosystem that's kind of like the whole self-sustaining system, right? Like all these systems are feeding into each other to help you know create a really resilient overall ecosystem.
Yeah.
And that's the whole concept of permaculture and stuff. You get into
Mhm.
that.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, I think skipping to the punchline, what's the remediation? And I like where you're heading with this. Is I think we can probably summarize it as spit yourself out of the matrix, become as reasonably independent as you can, and then the final piece is probably in three parts: is avoid excessive comforts, or don't get too comfortable, and conversely, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I heard this from a great talk show host in Seattle, Todd Herman, on 770 KTTH, and he's the one I got that term from. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Obviously, other people have said it, but I first heard it from him, and I thought, boy, that's a great way to express this stuff, because I think we see it's in the discomfort, and the failures and the pain is where growth happens. In a great expression I heard from Robert Breedlove on the What Is Money show is, pain is the edge of enlightenment. And that's so important to that's where we probe the universe, if you will, find out what works and what doesn't work. And how many times have we heard, it was in my failures where I have my greatest lessons, not my successes.
You mean I can't watch football and be eating my Doritos and just chill, man? What
You can do whatever you want.
You're ruining my vibes, dude.
I know.
You're
harsh on my vibe, man.
You're harshing my vibe, dude.
That's right.
What the hell, bro?
So I think we've done a pretty good job of showing that while the Mouse Utopia experiment is not perfectly analogous, right? I mean, it was very, very controlled situation. But are there analogs that we can see, that we can specifically call out within Western culture that you feel are reflective of the mouse experiment? So things such as urban culture or demographics. Are we seeing the advent of second-class citizens, single mothers, things like that? Are there things that you think that we could call out?
One of the things that comes to mind, is kind of the breakdown of the family, really. Like, I think that is one of the things that we can kind of see with this, like, ease of access to the resources, right? Like, we have this whole welfare state that kind of provides this thing from the state that that you're going to be taken care of by the state, and now the state kind of becomes the mother father figure, right? And so whereas in the past, these things were taken care of by the surrounding community, like people just kind of took care of each other, watched over each other, made sure that people were taken care of, that they may not have like the family or resources in their local area,
especially churches.
Yeah. And so people just kind of had more of this closer connection with each other and were able to help the other people around them, whether that be through like volunteer organizations, churches, fraternal organizations in the community. There was a lot more like just people getting together and doing things together, right? And taking care before the whole social safety net stuff came into play. And I think that really, in a way, with these social safety nets, is kind of creating the conditions of this that could be analogous to this whole Mouse Utopia experiment. Where people aren't going to have to like people now have an out, right? They have like this easy path where they can just take this from kind of a faceless entity of the government, right? And get the things that they need to survive. And it kind of takes out this people having the will to care for another person, because they're like, okay, well, they can just go do this with the government and be taken care of. So
I hope I can amplify your point, is because I totally agree with you, is we see with these government programs, not only do they remove the incentive to work, they actually create incentives not to work, right? And we're seeing instances of multi-generational welfare recipients. And I saw a video, and I knew this was already happening, but to see it in real time, it was really scary. And it was a mother who was chastising her son for wanting to go get a job. And I think it's like 15, 16 years old, something like that. And he wanted to kind of create his own thing. And I give this young man a lot of credit for doing that. And the mother rebuffed him so harshly, said, no, you're not doing that, because the moment that they see this address is receiving income, I'll get kicked off of whatever program that she was on. And she said, you're not doing that. You're not going to get a job. You're going to sit back and relax, and you're going to get on these programs with me. And she, to see her engage in this sort of behavior was really scary. And I knew it was already happening, but just to watch that emotional visceral reaction to her own son, her own progeny, stating that he wanted to go work, and probably honest. It sounded like it was honest work, and the way he said it, he had kind of some pride. He's like, I want to try this out, and her reaction was just heartbreaking, and a little infuriating, because it's like, no, you're going to continue to be a slug, and because we have every motivation not to work. And it was horrible.
Yeah, and then you're depriving yourself of the ability to be autonomous, and you start to get dependent on that system, right? And once that dependency starts, you start to not find a way to escape and fall into that learned helplessness category.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it becomes cultural at that point. And we've seen instances where it's not just at the individual basis, but entire communities are built on this idea that this thing called government, which nobody can point to, nobody can touch, is going to take care of them. Or even worse than that, they'll specifically call out, the recipients will specifically call out the taxpayers, say, you have an obligation to take care of me, you have an obligation to feed my family for me. And it was just, to see it that blatant in a multitude of videos, it was heartbreaking to watch.
Yeah, like any of these programs, once they're instituted, they're so easy to manipulate as well. For people. Like, people take advantage of them, and like I've had instances of people that I've known in my past where they've gotten on unemployment or something like that, and all you got to do to keep that check coming in is just hey, I filled out this application, and like just send it via email or something. And like, you just keep receiving the benefits until the jig gets up. It's like, wow, you've applied. I guess you can just keep applying. You just keep submitting your unemployment application or your applications. Nobody's hiring you. But you can just like fake an application, submit it, and like, just keep getting those things. So, there's all kinds of ways that people can game the system in that regard. So,
there's some other areas that I think that have impacted is in urban culture, right? So that's not a perfect analog, but it is, high levels of density. And we've seen, when we talk about different behavioral types, we have the aggressors, right? And we can call them what we want to call them, right? In terms of a collection. And these are ones who they don't have to go out and actually farm fields. That they just exist in terms of just taking, and they collectivize, if you will, and orient their aggressive behavior towards other collectives, if you will. And then we've also saw the rise of pansexual males. That they're not interested in procreation; they're interested in more recreation. And we don't see this in rural areas. We don't see these even in the suburban areas that much. It's a very high percentage, relatively speaking, of the pansexual males, in these urban areas. And I think that's, again, there's never a direct analog between the NIM experiments and humans, but I think that's not a bad one. We talked about in Japan, people falling back, and I think we're seeing the rise of second-class citizens, right? So we have incels, involuntary celibates, and I'm going to say these are individuals on both sides of the chromosomal aisle, right? They're I think the analog would be the withdrawn females, right, in the mouse population, and then the outcast / probers. Well, I think it's called Cynobulum. The people these mouse who just kind of did their own thing. They slowly just moved from area to area, right? The minimal interaction with other mice, or I guess rats, other rodents in that area. And bring us all together. I'll say one more is single mothers in the rat population. is it got to the point where they had a really difficult time defending the brood against invaders, right? And it created so much stress on them that they actually took out their stresses on their own children. And I think we're seeing that in today's world with an excessively high percentage of single mothers in Western cultures, that they have a difficult time providing for their young. And what can end up happening is they may take some of that stress out on their own kids because of it. And I think that's not a bad analog that we're seeing in there. What concerns me ultimately is the rapidly declining birth rates. And I say rapidly, obviously this happens over decades, right? But we all know that magic number of 2.1, 2.2 children per female.
The base replacement rate. Basically.
Yeah, that's right. Just to replace. Anything more than that, you can have growth. Anything less than that, you have decline. And we are, not only have we been below 2.1, but the rate at which it's happening that's also declining. So we actually have an acceleration of the decline. And that's, I guess it depends on how we define success or failure, right? And some would say that's a failure of our culture, of our population, whether it be the United States, South Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Canada, France, UK, Germany, that they are far below the 2.1, 2.2 necessary for sustainment. And we're seeing some areas of the world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, where they are far above 2.2. And so we're seeing kind of a population inversion happening in real time.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Is the whole male female dynamics when we're talking about our modern society is, I think there's still a lot of this stuff that we have hardwired in us that we're looking for in the opposite sex in a relationship.
Yeah.
And the modern man, the modern woman, may be working and like communicating in a certain way, but having a lot of mixed signals between each other, because there's some of this stuff is still like hardwired into us from the past on how we want to see each other show up in a relationship. So so that leads into more difficulties there as well. So yeah, it's just the times that we're living in. I do think that there is it very much seems like, okay, this has all happened before, and like we're going through this this kind of cycle again, where there's this decline, and then will it lead to total collapse? Like, I don't know, man, but like you're saying, there's some signs in there that certain things would become unstable and are currently unstable.
Yeah.
Leading towards that conclusion. I do believe that as humans, we have the ability to think and adapt and move out of those things, but it very much is like there is a certain trajectory that we're going on. I do think that the idea is that the trajectory that we're going on, have been placed in the population's mind that, okay, yeah, there are too many people out here. When if you just go take a trip out west or something like that, you see all the land that's out there. It's like, what are they talking about? Overpopulation. There's like plenty of land. The only thing is that when we have these systems that are set up in our societies and the way things are running, it very much leads towards this this house of cards that's easy to take down because of these systems. They're very complicated in the way they work, and they all depend on everything running smoothly, right? And one little thing could kind of topple the whole thing. So, so yeah, we're coming up to a time, and I want to maybe transition. We'll transition to talking more about like the future implications of where we're headed. But I think we can take a little intermission break, and then we'll move on into that. So you brought up a little comedy thing here, and I'll have that pulled up here.
So let me preface by saying that as guys, we're all, none of us are getting any younger, and we've probably all fallen into this behavior that Peter Griffin's about to exhibit here.
All right. I'll go. I'll shift the layout here, and let me play this guy. And let me refresh this first. And get
Oh my. Right over the head. I go to the John.
all right. Yep. Yeah, I definitely like see my dad doing some of that stuff. Yep.
It's almost its own language.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So
you want to cover a logical fallacy?
Yeah. Let's get into one of these logical fallacies.
So I've got one here. If you want, is appeal to common belief, or argumentum ad populum, also known as appeal to accepted belief, appeal to democracy, appeal to widespread belief. And basically, it's when the claim that most or many people in general, or of a particular group, accept a belief as true, is presented as evidence of the claim. Accepting another person's belief or many people's beliefs without demanding evidence as to why that person accepts the belief is lazy thinking and a dangerous way to accept information. The logical form is a lot of people believe X, therefore X must be true. And I've seen this so many times. And even the ways, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but I could kind of understand if the majority of the world's population believes something. It doesn't make it true, but I could kind of understand someone invoking that. But I've seen instances where people will take a minority of a population and then say, well, the majority of that teeny tiny population believes it, therefore it must be true. And that's just a horrible way to make arguments, because we could go back throughout history, throughout thousands of years, and see instances where the majority of people believed something that was obviously false, i.e. the world is flat, and say, well, we've just proven that many times, and so therefore we can also conclude belief does not make reality. They believed it, therefore it was true, and now it's not true. Or another one, I remember I think it was literally 1 month before Orville and Wilbur Wright had their first flight at Kitty Hawk. I think the New York Times put out an article stating that a man-made flight is impossible. It's like against the laws of physics. And the next month, the Wright brothers, demonstrated flight is possible. So and I'm sure that if the New York Times had done a poll at the time, is a human flight even possible? And they probably would have had the majority of people say, no, it's not possible. Well, belief does not make reality. So, yeah, I've had this, heaped upon me so many times in so many debates, and it's just infuriating, because you could pick whatever population you want and say, well, this population agrees with me, therefore you're wrong.
Well, I mean, 2 masks are more effective than 1, Jay.
Right.
So
That's right.
I think you should wear like 5, and that's better than 2.
That's
and,
right.
If scientists agree that 2 is better than 1, so
Right. Exactly. Always funny.
You should put 50 masks on.
Oh my gosh.
That'll be safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're to add to that, we're seeing instances of the jab, and more and more evidence, just a preponderance of evidence is coming out that belief that the more jabs you get, the better you'll be, the more protected you'll be. And in reality, what we're seeing through actual studies is the more jab you had, the more immunocompromised a person becomes, and not only immunocompromised, but actual damage down to the somatic gene level. And I think they're experiencing some autoimmune disorders as well. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, but that's what the science says, Jay.
Yeah.
The science is settled.
Right. Science is settled. You want to show the in the Matrix, the architect scene, and then the why do you persist scene?
Yeah.
You want to show that one?
Yeah. I'll pull that
So
up.
I like the Matrix scene or the architect scene, because the reason why I brought this up is because I think this is such a good analog for human behavior and the rat behavior in the rat Utopia experiment. And the architect points out something. So I think this should be at 2 minutes 14 seconds to about 4:15.
Okay.
So yeah, should be right there.
All right. Here we go.
There are only 2 possible explanations. There were 5 ones before. Either no one told me, or no one knows.
Precisely. As you are undoubtedly gathering, the anomaly is systemic, creating fluctuations in even the most simplistic equations.
Control me! You can't make me do anything. Choice. The problem is choice.
The first matrix I designed was quite naturally perfect. It was a work of art, flawless, sublime, a triumph equaled only by its monumental failure. The inevitability of its doom is apparent to me now as a consequence of the imperfection inherent in every human being. Thus I redesigned it, based on your history, to more accurately reflect the varying grotesqueries of your nature. However, I was again frustrated by failure. I have since come to understand that the answer eluded me because it required a lesser mind, or perhaps a mind less bound by the parameters of perfection. Thus, the answer was stumbled upon by another, an intuitive program, initially created to investigate certain aspects of the human psyche. If I am the father of the Matrix, she would undoubtedly be its mother.
The Oracle.
Please. As I was saying, she stumbled upon a solution whereby nearly 99% of all test subjects accepted the program as long as they were given a choice, even if they were only aware of the choice at a near unconscious level. While this answer functioned, it was obviously fundamentally flawed, thus creating the otherwise contradictory systemic anomaly that, if left unchecked, might threaten the system itself. Ergo, those that refuse the program, while a minority, if unchecked, would constitute an escalating probability of disaster.
This is about Zion.
You are here because Zion is about to be destroyed. Its every living inhabitant terminated, its entire existence eradicated.
Bullshit.
Denial is the most predictable of all human responses. But rest assured, this will be the 6th time we have destroyed it, and we have become exceedingly efficient at it. The function of the One is now to return to the source, allowing a temporary dissemination of the code you carry, reinserting the prime program. After which you will be select Matrix 20.
So I think in the first Matrix, they touched on that idea that whole crops were lost, and where many humans passed away that were under the control of the AIs. And then also there was a movie called The Animatrix. It was really a collection of short animes that revolved around the Matrix universe. And I think they went into a little more detail that they needed to create an environment, a virtual environment where the humans, they needed a certain amount of struggle in there. And if they didn't have that, if it were too ideal, then that was actually detrimental to the human's development. And, obviously the architect, touches on it, but I think that the Animatrix goes into more detail about that. I recommend the Animatrix if anyone are interested in it. Puts in a lot of detail. Some of it was a little whimsical. Some of it was very objective in terms of the Animatrix or the Matrix history, in terms of what got them to a certain point. But there's a lot of philosophy in it, and I think they talk about this in. There was a book called Simulation in Simulacra. I think a lot of the Matrix came out of that book, and I think the Wachowski directors required the main actors to read that book, to understand it, and and I think that scene does a good job of showing that we kind of needed some struggle, right, in order to have that sense of growth, that sense of accomplishment. It has to be meaningful accomplishments.
Yeah, that I remember watching that scene in the beginning when I first saw it, and like seeing how the architect's talking about all this has already happened before, and then like just kind of being confused a little bit, like what, like this whole Matrix thing and Neo has already happened several times and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Just kind of being confused. And he mentioned the Oracle, and what was it? Was it hope as an aspect or something like that there could be some kind of savior figure, and that's how Neo fits into all of it, is it gives hope or something like that?
Yeah, I think the Oracle specifically brings up the concept of hope, in there. I don't remember which one that was, which I think it's 2 or 3. But yeah, she talks about it. And it was kind of funny to see the architect's disdain for the Oracle, and that she, operated at an intuitive level. And in some ways, it reminds me of that Rush album, Hemispheres, where it was a mythology that Near Peart, the lyricist of Rush, he created this mythos of how man got its 2 hemispheres of the brain, one side being the logical, rational side, and the other side was the emotional, intuitive, feeling side. And it kind of brought in a little bit of ancient Greek mythology, Dionysus, being the I think the logical, rational feeling, reasoning one. I forget who the feeling one was, but there was a struggle there, and the hero had to go through a great arc of struggle to come back and recreate the 2 hemispheres, the Homo sapien brain, and it's kind of analogous to that. And it was just kind of funny to see the architect and the Oracle in that multi-decade struggle there.
Yeah, how this whole idea and concept of the mouse utopia and the way cities would be structured, it does make me think about how uh, this idea of the whole 15-minute city idea, where you're in this area that you can get to everything within 15 minutes, and it it really seems like that's kind of popping up now, especially in our area of Alabama and around
Yeah,
Huntsville.
yeah.
Is that there's these areas where there's everything that you need to like shop, eat, and do all these things. And it's like you don't even have to go very far to be able to get those things. It alludes to me where it's very much like we're controlled through our comforts, kind of thing, right?
Your audio is down a little bit.
No, really. Is it better now? Better.
Still a little intermittent.
Okay, so it might be some kind of noise.
So, while he's getting that, is the next thing that we were going to bring up for the audience is the final fight scene between Agent Smith and Neo in the third Matrix. I think it's Matrix Revolutions. And if you know anything about the Matrix, I thought it's just a masterpiece. I think the Wachowski brothers did a great job with it. And Smith is kind of not that nihilistic force. He just wants to obliterate everything, whether it be the AIs or the humans. Just get rid of it all, and let's just be done with it. And I think that I think we all have that a little bit of the Agent Smith in us, and we all have a little bit of Neo in us. And seeing that struggle, it's something we all struggle with, right? Is growth and positivity versus nihilism. Some just have it more or less than others. And I think that what we see here is it's that internal struggle that we all deal with at some level. And those who have high levels of self-actualization kind of tilt towards the Neo side of the house here. And so it's interesting to see. And I think it's a very inspirational film, an inspirational scene, I should say. And I kind of have my own personal relation to this. I'll tell the anecdote after Greg plays the clip.
All right. Okay.
Why, Mr. Anderson? Why? Why? Why do you do it? Why? Why get up? Why keep fighting? You believe you're fighting for something, for more than your survival? Can you tell me what it is? Do you even know? Is it freedom or truth? Perhaps peace? Could it be for love? Illusions, Mr. Anderson, vagaries of perception. Temporary constructs of a feeble human intellect trying desperately to justify an existence that is without meaning or purpose. And all of them as artificial as the Matrix itself. Although only a human mind could invent something as insipid as love. You must be able to see it, Mr. Anderson. You must know it by now. You can't win. It's pointless to keep fighting. Why, Mr. Anderson? Why? Why do you persist? Because I choose to.
Hell yeah.
When I was with Bravo Company, 20th Special Forces Group, I was a Special Forces candidate, and there was a contingent of about a dozen of us. We were all getting ready to go either Special Forces Assessment and Selection or Special Forces Qualification course. And we were in this one room. It was kind of a classroom environment, and we were going over some skill. It may have been some like knot tying or something like that. And I remember this one Green Beret came in the room, and he was really cool. His name is Sergeant John Nobrega, and he was telling us like, look, trying to just keep us motivated, you know, going through selection and going through the qualification course. And he had some colorful descriptions, and he talked about, you know, when we're going through land nav, you're just going through pricker bushes and you know, clothes or our BDUs getting completely torn up and walking out of the bush, and we just got Bermuda shorts on because everything's ripped up. And you know, he said a lot of those guys, because it's a mix of National Guard and full-time Army personnel who were there. And he made a good point. He said, you know, a lot of the guys who were full-time Army, they kind of get caught in a corner because if they DOR, drop on request, they're not immediately sent back to the unit. Sometimes they can be there for weeks or even months. And in doing so, they may end up with some really crappy details, like literally filling sandbags or setting up a land navigation course. Stuff that's just boring as heck and it's hard work, and they're just kind of in this limbo, if you will, and because the Bragg doesn't necessarily send them back to their unit. He said because they're at the federal level, as compared to National Guardsmen, when they're going through selection of the queue, if any of them have a DOR or drop on request, then they have 48 hours. Bragg has 48 hours to get them out of there and back to their home unit, because the state won't pay for them to be at Bragg for an excessive amount of time. And the state is only going to pay for the time necessary for them to do training. So he said there's always that possibility. It's always in the back of a full-time soldier's mind that if they DOR, they're going to be stuck there. And that's just kind of like a personal hell where I can stay here in a course that, you know, it's just going to grind me out, or I have to stay here and just do really crappy detail. As compared to the Guardsmen, is if I stay here, this course sucks. And if I DOR in 72 hours, I can be home and I can be drinking a couple of Frosties. And he said that's the easy way out. And he said, as Guardsmen, you have the ability to say, no, I'm going to stay here. Why? Because I choose to. And I still remember the way he framed it. He says, that's very empowering. That when you know you have the option for the easy path and you choose the hard path, it's because you choose to do so. You know, and just kind of remind me a lot of what Neo was going through. You know, why persist? Because I choose to. And I think that the Mouse Utopia experiment is the complete antithesis of that, is choosing the hard path. You know, and the Stoics talked about this. You know, and it was it Marcus Aurelius, I think, talks about this, you know, in meditations, and deliberately choosing the hard path, whatever that is. It doesn't necessarily mean we all have to be Navy SEALs, right? Is whatever your hard path is that leads you to growth and discomfort, and you know, and being hopefully a positive effect on society, maybe inspiration for other people. I think that's something that we can all choose to, because we choose to do that.
Yeah, exactly, man. I don't know if my audio is coming in better now, but
You're good.
I think that is a solution, and it's the folks that believe that they're in control and want society to go in a certain direction and humans to go in a certain direction. They want you to stay comfortable. They want you to stay lazy. They want you to stay not pushing forward and finding a way to be that positive influence on others. And it's not talking. I think a lot of times it's showing, and like you said, making that choice. And you always have that choice within you to do the uncomfortable thing, do the thing that's not going to be easy, that's going to put you outside of your comfort zone, to to change things. It's gotta come from you. It's gotta come from you as an individual. You have to make that choice to do not fall into the whole trap of the learned helper. I do want to bring up one resource, to kind of tie into this, kind of idea from the Grand Theft World podcast and of the setup on John Calhoun's work and the origins of that. So
is nothing novel. Bad pun. It's not new. It's not new. They've been working on social control theory for a long time. The Mouse Utopia experiments of John C. Calhoun on behalf of the Rockefeller Foundation spanned decades. They started work, I think maybe in the 50s, and then continued work into the 70s. It's a large range, and they're not really interested in mice, despite what the experiments all consisted of mice. They're interested in taking what they learned from those mammals, overcrowding, predation, food starvation, these sort of things, to the preening of society, to the beautiful ones, to the presenting of people who have zero substance or meaning to offer to the world, and yet they are wildly, spectacularly popular out there in social media somehow. It spells the end of society. It specifically spells the end of one way of life and the rising up of maybe a more self-reliant, counterintuitive to the status quo type of lifestyle for people, where it's anything but superficial and preening. It's more about substance and meaning. All right, as we go forward in tonight's episode, we're going to do some deep dives. We got some documents to dig into. There's a lot of really
all right, that was it. But kind of reiterating what we're talking about. Yeah, it's kind of, we're moving maybe into the end of one story and into the beginning of another one, where those that can see like maybe where this is all heading, that direction that it's going, there is a call for you. There's a call for you to go in a different direction.
Yeah.
If you can see the way that this is playing out, and you don't want to go down that path, there's a call for you to do something different, which is to take things within your control, right? And like you're saying, Jay, make that choice, right, to do the thing to get yourself out of that situation. Like, if you don't want to fall into being controlled and led through your comforts, then don't fall into that path. Decide that you want to take on the self-reliance aspect and you want to figure out a solution and be that example for other people.
Yeah. I think I think it's a really good point, is in terms of being an inspiration, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to have some mass appeal. It could literally be the top 5 people you're around, right? And hey, you know what? Greg's an inspiration for me, and I really like what he's doing. That may be enough. That's perfectly acceptable, and I know that, you and a lot of people we both associate with, even within our own group, we can be an inspiration. That's a pretty good way to operate. I want to point out something here, another historical analog, and I think you brought up a good point, Greg, around we've seen this before throughout history, right? And one of the most famous historical examples, and I apologize for bringing it up now, is the ancient Roman Empire, right? It was well known for excesses, government interference, lack of legitimate government services, i.e. local military protection, right? They allowed the Vandals and the Goths to come in and really just, loot the area. I think Edward Gibbon, I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name, but he has a multi-volume work that he did. It was the decline and fall of the ancient Roman Empire. And, there are a multitude of factors. It's impossible to narrow it down to just the one thing. But, Rome, I think, was the first city on the planet that had a population, the actual Rome proper had as the first city that had a population of 1 million. I think that's correct. I could be wrong in that, so I apologize if I'm off. But considering the technology at the time, and we're literally talking 2,000 years ago, that was an amazing accomplishment. And so the Roman aqueducts are still still around, right? And their ability to bring in wheat from the Mediterranean, across the Mediterranean from Egypt, quite an accomplishment. The salt mines, while the salt mines were basic punishments, but their ability to bring in salt as a necessary resource, all the systems behind that, pretty amazing. And the more I learn about the ancient Roman Empire in terms of their positive contributions, the more impressed I am. And the way they ran the military as an institution, very impressive. And seeing that major stratification between the common people and those in government, and they, in a way, they created their own Mouse Utopia experiment where those within those inner sanctums of government were completely cut off from any real impactful interaction with the rest of the empire, right? Everything was just fed to them in this perfect environment. And we saw this with Caligula and Nero, where they were kind of the pinnacle, the ultimate of excess and decadence. I think to the point where Caligula mandated that all of the wives of the senators had to engage in I'm going to say paid salacious behavior. I'll just leave it at that. That sort of thing. I think was it Nero or Caligula had a donkey as his consul, something that effect, and just completely disconnected from the rest of the population, and there was no work necessary to get what they were getting. And then we can add in all the other stuff of diseases that were rampant at the time, pansexual behavior, if you will, their sexualization of minors, right? All that stuff. And it was just a complete cutting off from reality. They had created this little universe in there, and by the way, one of the consequences of that is the corruption of the money supply. And everyone here knows I'm really into Bitcoin and how much of a proponent of hard money I am. And in order just to keep the deception going, right, the party going, they kept debasing the value of the denarius and the auris and the solidus over centuries. And I think that it was the corruption of the money supply that basically caused all these other things that were really the cause of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. But I think that was kind of another analog. Is they created their own culture within the higher echelons of government. They were very tightly packed and had zero connection with reality. And they created a post-scarcity society within that little enclave.
Yeah, I guess it kind of segues into the next thing I would bring up, which is where do you think we're headed, especially when we factor in AI into the equation going into the future?
Yeah.
With this whole controlled through our comforts idea as well, and talks of these large companies replacing workers with AI, and where do people find meaning, and find work in a future like that?
Yeah.
And what does that look like?
I'm very anti-Luddite, and for those of you who know, that kind of going back into the I guess the first and second industrial revolution, you know a little about this mythical character called Ned Ludd, Ludd, I think is how it's pronounced. And the Luddites, who were the anti-technologists, and the anti-technologists is probably the best way to say it. And these were individuals who would who, in order to secure their own jobs, they would go in and destroy capital, such as fabric looms, devices for actually turning heat into actual workable energy sources, directed energy. And what we always heard was this technology was taking jobs away from people. And then the other side of the argument was, no, we're freeing up those people to go do other jobs that only humans can do, that these machines cannot, right? And so there were basically a multi-century progression from everything was done, like 99% of human work or human production was done through manual labor, to an inversion where the vast majority of production is done through some sort of non-human manual work, automated means, etc. And what we always heard, what I heard even as a young man, was this will enable people to engage in other types of work, especially more intellectual and also creative endeavors. And for a long time, that definitely held up, right? So we had people who were involved with, let's say, movie production, TV production, right? Or we had people who became web developers, Python programmers, full stack developers, right? All these jobs that didn't exist, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and now there are entire industries that are coming out because of that. And if we take a look at that long arc of history over basically 2 centuries, and yeah, we could definitely see that there was always the ability to move away from manual labor into more creative endeavors, for sure. But it's taken 2 centuries to do that. So these populations had the time to adjust, right, over many decades. And we're getting to the point now where, as Ray Kurzweil talks about in his book, The Singularity is Near, we're at the knee of the curve in the double exponential. And where the technology is advancing so quickly that, and this is how he defines this, the technological singularity. And it may have been another individual who defined it, but Ray Kurzweil borrows from it. And it's basically this technological singularity is where technology advances so quickly that we don't have the ability to understand what the implications are of those advanced technologies. We can't project that quickly enough. And I think what's concomitant with that, what's parallel to that, is we don't have, as humans, with a biological substrate, we don't have the ability to adapt. Because just take a look at what's happening within 5 years, in the past 5 years with AI, and then you project forward to the next 5 years of AI. It is going so quickly that we don't have the ability culturally, financially, legally to make those adjustments. So whereas before it was a multi-generational, multi-decade process of adjusting from manual labor into creative endeavors, I think we're in a really, really precarious situation. And usually I'm the last person to to talk like this. I'm always the person who's pro technology and pro adaptation. And I'm wondering if we just don't have the biological ability to adapt quickly enough.
It's very interesting that at the times that we're moving into with this, and I do think about that, where people, how do you derive some kind of meaningful work, in a world like this? But you could have some AIs running like 5 offshore business accounts for you, I guess, and collecting the royalties from it, I guess, maybe arbitraging products or something. But then, I guess your basic needs are taken care of at that point, but then, what drives your meaning beyond that? I've had that conversation with one of my coworkers, because it's like, and then what is AI right now? It's like, so some people are just spinning up these companies saying that they're AI and they just have a
Right.
bunch of people working overseas for them,
Yeah.
you know.
And Microsoft did that about 10, 15 years ago, where they said, oh, we're going to have these machines that can create the code for you. And all they were doing is they just had overseas or offshore people working behind the scenes that were creating the code. It's like, oh, stop. They were trying to present that, oh, we're using AI. No, you're not.
Yeah. I talked to a guy that's in IT in Virginia recently at this hempcrete workshop that I went to. And he was telling me that a lot of the people that claim to have AI, they're just using like offshore workers to do things and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it's another one of those bubbles, I think. Like, you know, we have the .com bubble or whatever right now, you know, that people can see that they're putting this huge investment into it. And so people are jumping on the bandwagon as much as possible to see what they can get. And just seeing if they can get as much of that money that's going out as possible. So it's pretty interesting. Have you ever seen the movie Zardos?
Oh, great movie. That was such a good movie. And I think that came out, 72 or 74? That predicted so many things that we're seeing today.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild movie for, you know, talking about what we're talking about. And it very much is like kind of maybe the potential future where, you know, the people are kind of separated between, it's kind of like this Elysium society where they have access to a lot of this technology. And then there's like the rest of humanity, which is like at zero technology, very primitive. It's really interesting. Sean Connery in the movie. Yeah.
He did a great job in this movie. He definitely broke away from his James Bond background. And, you know, so I see it says 5.8. Here's the thing about it. Zardoz was a concept movie, and typically concept movies are not implemented well, you know. And I think given the fact that it came out, I think it's 72 or 74, that number one. Number two, it was a concept movie. And given the relatively low tech that they had at the time, I think Zardoz deserves a much better score than that's given right there. It's really well done.
And if you want to kind of like a peek into like probably the elite's view of where they want to go, like I think it kind of shows like this is how we want things to run, you know?
Yeah, that was a definite stratification. They had their inner sanctum that was highly protected from everyone else, and then everyone who lived outside the inner sanctum, outside that virtual enclosure, they were truly just peasants, just truly serfs. You know, they were married to the land, and they were just in just horrible shape. And then even within
a giant head flying around, giving everyone guns or whatever.
Right. That was great. Even within the inner sanctum, they had basically 2 or 3, you know, layers. You know, that they had the lower class, where that was like the useful idiots. You know, then the second level is kind of management of the lower side, and then the top layer, there was only like 2 or 3 people who were kind of running the whole show, and it would be almost like the Roman triumvirate of the 3 emperors. You know, and so it was just you know, it's very creative, and some of the technology that they predicted have come true. You know, they had an AI model, and it existed in an optical substrate. Like, and so they kind of predicted,
or they were like transferring people's consciousness so they like keep living in different bodies or something through crystals or something like that.
And, you know, that kind of leads me into the next thing you were talking about. You know, the future. What does the future hold? I think that so the 2 things I really wanted to talk about were AI, and the second thing was longevity. And you know, if you read another great Ray Kurzweil book, Fantastic Voyage, Live Long Enough to Live Forever, and he talks about the concept of bridge technology or bridges, where the idea is if we can create, and these are my words, great metabolic health within our bodies for right now on this biological substrate, then we can live long enough that the technology gets to the point where it can help us fix problems that we have with our bodies, whether it be autoimmune disorders, chronic illnesses, chronic inflammation, and then one of the most important things is reduced telomere DNA. That is the ultimate decider of how long we can live. I think there's a technical term I think called lifespan, and typically our ultimate lifespan is 120 years. So if that's that kind of the final barrier, is making sure that we can repair and continue to extend our telomere DNA. Then what that allows us to do, that's kind of the first bridge. The second, and it allows us to get to the point where we can get to the second bridge, is we can start to augment our abilities through neurological connections. We could actually have a parallel brain, if you will, with non-invasive nanobots that can work with our biological substrate for greater cognition, better healing of the body internally, automatically, passively or actively all the time, getting rid of cancer, getting rid of autoimmune disorders, getting rid of chronic diseases all the time. And then the final instance, so that's, I think that would be bridge 2, is where we start introducing augmentation of the substrate, the biological substrate. And then the third bridge would basically be where we transition away from the highly vulnerable biological substrate to a different substrate. And he said, maybe something like silicone, right? And something that's not so vulnerable. But at that point, we're retaining the informational aspect of our bodies. And so I think that it gives us indefinite longevity, right? I'm not going to say infinite because that's not possible, but indefinite longevity where we can continue to advance as a species. But the thing about it though is at that point, because there would be the introduction of nanobots as a secondary layer to our cognition, where does the AI end and where's the Homo sapien end and where does AI take over? And he says after a while, that's not even going to be a legitimate question anymore. There won't be a difference between the two, So the reason I'm saying this and that long ass answer is, this may be good news or bad news. I don't know. The things that we're seeing with the mouse Utopia experiment and some of the issues that we're seeing, that may not be an issue anymore in the sense that we define it. We may be creating a whole host of other things, kind of like what Zardoz talks about, in the movie, and with great longevity, and our ability to address a lot of metabolic issues that we're facing in our biological substrate, ideally can be addressed with technology, and then the whole bunch of other issues, because he calls death, he calls it a disease. He doesn't call it a final state. He calls it a disease, and it's called senescence, which is getting older. And so I think that's, I think it's so, I'm a huge proponent and believer of what he talks about in Fantastic Voyage. Not exactly that, but pretty close to it. And I think that as AI comes about, it's going to show us how to create bridges 1, 2, and 3 for the future. And I think a lot of the issues that we're facing now will go away, and we'll face a whole bunch of new issues.
Well, we should do a whole show on that because is that the solution or is that a trap? That's my question. So
yeah, that is a whole thing. And it's hard to discuss this stuff from a first principles point of view because we've never seen this before. We've seen instances of excessive government interference. We've seen instances of moving from a hard money standard to a soft money standard. All these different things over and over again. We've seen instances of people or leaders promoting bad philosophy, Keynesianism versus Austrian economics, right? There's all that, and we have multiple instances over time. We've never seen this before, and so even identifying the first principles is really difficult, much less reasoning from a first principles point of view.
Human machine hybrid, kind of going into that realm. It's yeah, totally whole topic in and of itself. I do think that, you know, the people that are running the show, they do want to have some kind of live forever, transcend the human system kind of thinking. I remain skeptical on that, but yeah, that could be a whole another show. Well, we're coming up on 2 hours here, Jay. Yep. Where can people find you, follow you, support the stuff that you got going on?
You go to meetup.com, MEET, up, UP, meetup.com. Look for Bitcoin, Huntsville, crypto, and coffee. We're a group of very diverse individuals. We are all ardent supporters and believers in Bitcoin being the ultimate form of money. And I like to call it the ultimate freedom accelerator. It's not about an investment. It's not about finance. In my opinion, Bitcoin is one of the best ways that we can spit ourselves out of the matrix, spit ourselves out of the system, and move into a system which is completely orthogonal or completely independent of any government. It is completely decentralized, and it's just a great group of people. All we want to do is help people be comfortable with Bitcoin. We're not selling anything other than we're asking people to come to the table in good faith, because this stuff is very different from anything we've seen before. It's been around for 16 years now, and we ask people to come to the table in good faith. We ask that you do your own research, do the work. It takes some time to get used to this stuff. It's very different, but we have great conversations when we discuss what are the implications of Bitcoin. Why is it so important? We have our own Telegram chat where we're bringing up current events. We bring up philosophical questions, and we also bring up questions such as how-tos. I don't know how to use this type of Bitcoin wallet. Anyone have any experience with it? Yep, someone's probably got some experience with it. So it's a great group of people. If you have any interest in Bitcoin, come to our meetup. If you want to be an active participant, that's great. If you want to be an orbiter and just kind of sit in the back, you can, not a problem. All I ask you just come to the table in good faith, because there are a lot of detractors out there.
Well, excellent, Jay. Thank you so much again for being my co-host here and doing the Truth Seeking Thursdays. Really appreciate it. Y'all like, subscribe, share the channel and the videos, and let's get this out to more people. So appreciate you guys, and we'll see you guys next. Not next Thursday, but the Thursday after, and and we'll catch you guys for another Truth Seeking Thursday. See ya.
Be good.
Peace.